I don't tell this story often, mostly because I hate reliving it, but also because when you try to explain something like this, people smile politely, maybe even laugh it off. But I know what I heard, I know what I saw, and God help me, I know what's still out there. It was late October when Eric and I decided to go camping in Blackwood Forest. We wanted to get away, no phones, no city noise, just miles of trees and sky. Blackwood had a reputation for being remote, untouched, and other things, though we didn't pay much attention to the stories. Stories about strange disappearances and voices were just campfire fodder, or so we thought. The hike in was uneventful, beautiful even. The trail wove between towering pines that stretched like ancient sentinels towards the sky, their branches forming a canopy that muted the sunlight. By the time we found a clearing and pitched our tent, the world was steeped in twilight. Everything was bathed in this eerie orange glow, the kind that makes shadows seem longer and darker than they should be. We built a fire, drank a couple of beers, and talked about nothing important. It was quiet, too quiet at first, but we chalked it up to be the forest being remote. But looking back, the stillness was unnatural. No rustling leaves, no distant owl calls, just the crackle of the fire and our own voices. As night fell, silence seemed to thicken, pressing in around us. It was the kind of quiet that makes you hyper aware of every sound, your breathing, the occasional pop of a log in the fire. When we crawled into the tent, I remember saying something like, "At least it's peaceful." Eric didn't respond. He just stared into the trees, his face pale as snow. Should have asked him what he saw. I woke up hours later to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was Eric moving around, but then I realized the steps were outside the tent. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the dead leaves. They circled us, pausing every so often before resuming their measured pace. I lay there, my pulse pounding in my ears, trying to convince myself it was just an animal, a deer, maybe, a fox. But then the steps stopped. Something spoke. Jonathan. Eric. It wasn't loud, but the voice carried, slipping through the tent's walls like smoke. It was soft and sing-song, the way you might call to a child who was lost. I froze. My mouth went dry, and for a second I convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then Eric whispered, "You heard that, right?" I nodded, though he couldn't see me in the dark. The voice came again, closer this time. "Come out and play." There was a lilting quality to the words, like it was enjoying itself. I wanted to move, to grab the flashlight, to do something, but my body wouldn't obey. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming that whatever was out there wasn't human. Then the scratching started. It was faint at first, soft drag of nails against fabric. It started slow, near the base of the tent, then travelled upwards, slow and deliberate. The sound was maddening, like whoever or whatever it was wanted us to know it was there. Eric grabbed the flashlight, his hands trembling so badly the beam wobbled across the tent walls. "We've got to go," he whispered, his voice shaking. "No," I hissed back. "You don't know what's out there." He didn't answer. He just unzipped the tent in one frantic motion, and before I could stop him, he was gone, the flashlight bouncing as he bolted into the darkness. For a second, I was paralyzed, caught between the safety of the tent and the terror of what lay outside. But then something slammed into the tent, hard enough to knock me sideways. The walls caved inwards, and I scrambled out, my breath hitching as I hit the cold night air. The forest was a maze, shadows. The moon barely pierced the canopy, and the trees looked wrong. Their trunks were gnawed, their branches twisted into unnatural shapes, like skeletal hands reaching towards me. The air smelled sharp, metallic, like blood. I heard Eric screaming. It wasn't a normal scream. It was a guttural, broken, the sound of someone being ripped apart. It came from deeper in the woods, and every instinct told me to run the other way, but I couldn't leave him. I took a step, then another, my legs shaking so badly I thought they'd give out. Eric? I called, my voice barely more than a whisper. The laughter started then. It was faint at first, a low chuckle that seemed to come from everywhere, but it grew louder, more distorted, until it was a chorus of voices overlapping and echoing. Some were high-pitched and manic, others low and guttural, like growls. I turned, and that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shape in the darkness, a pale smudge against the black, but as it stepped into the moonlight, I felt my stomach drop. Its limbs were too long, its skin stretched out over jagged bones. Its face was wrong. The, the eyes were hollow pits, and its mouth was an impossible grin, the teeth jagged and uneven. It tilted its head, watching me, then it spoke. "Jonathan," it whispered. The sound was like needles sliding into my brain. "Don't you want to see your friend?" I didn't think. I just ran. The forest seemed to shift around me, the trees bending and twisting, their roots clawing at my feet. The laughter followed, growing louder, closer, till it was in my ear, in my head. I didn't look back, not even when I heard the heavy crunch of footsteps right behind me. When I burst onto the trail and saw my car, I nearly sobbed, threw myself inside, locking the doors and jamming the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life and I floored it. Gravel sprang as I sped down the dirt road. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw it, standing at the edge of the forest, its head tilted, its grin stretched impossibly wide. As the car disappeared into the distance, I swear I saw it wave. They never found Eric. The search team said there was no sign of him, no sign of us ever being there. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I hear it again, soft and teasing, just outside my window. Our life at Lake St. Gallen was everything we had wanted, or so I kept telling myself. David and I moved here 2 years ago, retreating from the chaos of city life to the quiet solitude of a cabin in the woods. The lake stretched like a dark mirror to the edge of our property, bordered by towering pines and the rustling silence of the forest. We were one of 8 cabins dotted around the lake, each separated by enough land to make you feel utterly alone. David took to the lifestyle instantly. He spent mornings down at the dock fishing, his silhouette blending with the mist that hovered over the water. I preferred the cabin. The sunlight poured through the kitchen windows as I sipped coffee and read all the books on my once ever growing list. There was a permanence here, a sense of stillness I hadn't felt in years. I loved the way the seasons transformed the lake. The fiery leaves of autumn reflected like a painting on the water, the brittle stillness of winter mornings when the lake turned to ice. Our neighbors were essentially ghosts. Most of the cabins belonged to city people like us, but they came only for the occasional weekend. For long stretches, it was just David, me, and the occasional visit from Naya. Naya was a cleaner that came recommended to us by the cabin's previous owners. She came once a month, her long dark hair streaked with grey, her sharp eyes taking in everything. She was Ojibwe and rarely spoke in English, moving through the cabin like she belonged to a different world. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. One day while finishing up, she unexpectedly made us tea, a strong chamomile that she was very enthusiastic to serve to David and me. "Holiday tea to celebrate my heritage," she said with a big smile. David thought it was a quaint bit of local culture, but it unsettled me. There was a gravity to Naya's presence, something unspoken that clung to her like smoke. I didn't ask questions, I just drank the tea, the bitter warmth spreading through me like a balm. That night was awful. I remember the date, November 23rd, because it happened to be my birthday. Instead of celebrating, Dave and I spent the night drenched in sweat, feverish and disorientated. The nausea came in waves, and my head throbbed with the pressure that felt like it might split me into two. David joked the next morning that it must have been something we ate, maybe a sudden cold snap. Wanted to believe him, but something about it didn't feel right. By the 2nd November, I started to notice the pattern. Began with the cleaning. Naya showed up unannounced on Friday, the 24th, even though we told her we didn't need any help in November. She moved through the cabin with a kind of frenetic energy, scrubbing every surface, burning herbs until the air was thick with their earthy sharpness. Then she served us the same tea. I remember the smell, chamomile mixed with something else, something chemical. A holiday tea to celebrate my heritage, she said again, her smile tight, her eyes holding mine for a bit too long. There was something majorly off, something about the way her fingers lingered on the rim of the cup as she handed it to me. David took his with a grin, swallowing it in one gulp. Not wanting to seem ungrateful, I took a sip of mine. The sickness hit that night, hard. I woke up in the dark, my limbs heavy, my head spinning. Beside me, David was passed out, his breathing deep and even, but I couldn't move. It was as if my body had been pinned to the bed, trapped under an invisible weight. Panic surged through me, my heart pounding as I struggled to cry out. But no sound came. Then I heard it, a low, mournful wail, echoed across the lake. Sound so alien, it made my skin crawl. It wasn't the cry of an animal or the wind through the trees. It was something alive, something ancient. Sound grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the cabin, seeping into my bones. I wanted to look, to see what was out there, but my body refused to obey. My eyes, fixed on the window, caught the faintest shadow, a tall, gaunt figure standing just below the glass. Its face was wrong, hollow, its eyes were void, blacker than the night. I felt it staring at me, its gaze piercing through my skull. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could feel was the pull, an invisible force urging me to step outside, to leave the safety of the cabin. The wail crescendoed, terrible, keening sound that rattled my teeth, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it vanished. The next morning, I was convinced something was deeply wrong. I began asking questions around the lake, but no one wanted to talk about Naya. The other cabins stayed dark through most of the month, their occupants vanishing like clockwork. When I mentioned the tea, the sickness, their faces paled. One woman, her voice barely above a whisper, said, "Just drink it, don't ask why." It was Naya herself who finally gave me the truth, though she did it so reluctantly. I think the neighbors had mentioned to her that I was asking around. "Tea keeps you safe from the taking," she said one afternoon, her eyes fixed on the lake. It is a family recipe to bind you to your body, keep the spirit from taking you." "What spirit?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her gaze shifted to me, hard and unyielding. "The old spirit of the lake," she said. "It wakes on the third weekend of November. It comes to those who are strong, those who are vibrant, and needs to consume them to sustain itself." "And the tea?" I pressed. She hesitated. "It makes you weak, undesirable." The words hung between us, heavy and awful. I thought of the sickness, the way it left me hollowed out, and I realized what she meant. She was poisoning us on purpose. Spirit looks for the healthiest among us, those with strong bodies and strong spirits. It needs a sacrifice, and it takes the ones who seem the most vibrant. By poisoning you, I make you look weak, unworthy of its attention. I know the sickness is painful, and I am truly sorry for that, but it is the only way to keep you safe, to make you seem undesirable to the spirit. You do this for every resident here. My family has not lost a human to the taking in 26 years. The spirit feeds on animals through the night, though my mother worries it is growing impatient for a strong human sacrifice. I looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in, the way the other cabins always seemed dark throughout November, the way the lake seemed to hold its breath. It all made sense now, the unspoken understanding that everyone here shared, the reason no one was ever outside that night. "Thank you," I finally said, my voice trembling, "for keeping us safe." Naya nodded, her expression softening. There was something in her eyes, something haunted. Third week of November is in just a couple days. This morning, I looked out at the water, surface calm and still, knowing we had the right person looking out for us. But I can't shake the feeling of dread that clings to me like a second skin. I know what's coming. I know the sickness will hit, and we'll spend the night, withering in pain, fighting the urge to step outside. I will drink the tea. I will let Naya do what she must. Her bundles of sage, sweet grass filling the air with their sharp, earthy scent. I am grateful for her protection, for the knowledge that she and her family have kept the spirit at bay for nearly 3 decades. And I will pray that this year the spirit finds David and I as undesirable as before.